Part 1. Behind the Mask, a modern epidemic of the spirit. In a world that prides itself on progress, openness, and self-expression, one might assume we're closer than ever to living in truth. But the opposite seems to be happening. We're drowning in a sea of curated selves, smiling masks, and performative virtue. This isn't just a cultural quirk, it's a spiritual illness, a subtle, insidious sickness that slowly eats away at authenticity, trust, and the soul. Hypocrisy has become the great silent plague of the 21st century. But what do we mean by hypocrisy? It's not just the occasional contradiction between what someone says and what they do. No, hypocrisy, in its truest philosophical sense, is the conscious wearing of a moral mask to hide an unwillingness to confront one's inner contradictions. It's not merely failing to live up to your ideals. It's pretending to have ideals you never intended to honor in the first place. It's a lie told not just to others, but to oneself. As Soren Kierkegaard once warned, the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. That's precisely what hypocrisy does. It tempts us to trade the self for acceptance, to silence our inner truth for social applause. Today, we live in an era of hypervisibility. Every action, every opinion, every stance can be documented, filtered, and broadcasted to the world. That visibility creates a perverse incentive to appear good rather than to be good. Social media has become a theater of moral grandstanding. Everyone performs, everyone signals, but very few reflect. The consequence? A society where authenticity is risky and performative morality is rewarded. Nietzsche saw this coming long before we did. He described modern morality as a kind of herd instinct, a domestication of the human will. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual." The hypocrite, then, is not just someone who lies, but someone who betrays their own will in exchange for comfort within the herd. They don't just deceive the world, they surrender the power to choose for themselves. And this isn't just a personal problem. Hypocrisy metastasizes. It spreads through institutions, relationships, communities. It makes trust impossible. When people can't be certain whether your values are genuine or just a performance, real connection breaks down. Dialogue becomes rhetoric. Ethics becomes marketing. And truth, it becomes negotiable. Many young people feel this tension deeply. They sense the hollowness behind polished words. They watch influencers speak of mental health while exploiting insecurity for profit. They see corporations preach inclusivity while profiting off exploitation. They're told to speak their truth in a world that punishes truth tellers and rewards the most skillful actors. But here's the deeper tragedy. Hypocrisy doesn't only mislead others, it corrupts the self. The more we pretend, the harder it becomes to remember what was ever real. The mask fuses to the face. As Carl Jung wrote, the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. In our attempt to be accepted, to fit, to please, we lose access to our own depths. The soul goes silent. This is why hypocrisy isn't just a social flaw, it's a spiritual crisis. It signals a rupture between inner life and outer appearance. It makes integrity seem radical. It makes truth-telling feel dangerous. And it leaves a generation aching for something real, anything real. What's the cost of living in a world where everyone is performing? What becomes of the soul in an age of masks? Part 2. The Birth of the Mask. Why hypocrisy feels safer than truth. To understand why hypocrisy has become so widespread in our time, we must look deeper than appearances. It's not enough to blame it on technology, on politics, or on culture. These are only surface symptoms. The disease runs much deeper. It begins in the human heart, in the ancient tension between fear and freedom. No one is born a hypocrite. Children don't know how to lie about their values. They live them, however chaotically. But as we grow, we begin to notice the costs of authenticity. We learn often painfully that honesty can provoke rejection, that integrity might isolate us, that being true to ourselves can come with consequences we aren't ready to bear. So, slowly, we adapt. We edit ourselves. We say what is acceptable, we feel what is allowed, and we believe what won't get us punished. In his discourses, Epictetus noted, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." The hypocrite, then, is not always malicious. More often they are terrified of being seen, judged, cast out. Hypocrisy becomes a shield, protecting the fragile ego from the cruel gaze of the crowd. But that fear, unchecked, becomes a way of life. And when enough individuals begin living behind masks, a strange inversion happens. The mask becomes more real than the face. Society no longer honors the authentic but worships the socially acceptable. Hypocrisy is no longer a betrayal. It becomes a norm, a niche, a survival strategy. This is especially true in the digital age. Online platforms reward brevity, clarity, and outrage, not complexity or nuance. Algorithms favor what is viral, not what is honest. A tweet that postures moral outrage spreads faster than a quiet reflection on ethical ambiguity. Performative outrage, therefore, becomes profitable. In such a world, hypocrisy isn't just common, it's incentivized. Take, for example, the phenomenon of virtue signaling. When someone performs morality not out of genuine concern, but to elevate their social status. We've all seen it. Empty statements of solidarity, moral one-liners, curated hashtags. But beneath it, there is often no risk, no sacrifice, no real commitment. Philosopher Hannah Arendt warned us of this in The Human Condition, where she spoke of the danger of action losing its meaning in a world dominated by appearance. When words and gestures no longer align with deeds, the moral currency of a society begins to collapse. Yet this is not entirely new. Hypocrisy has always haunted the ethical life. Jesus himself, in the Gospel of Matthew, fiercely rebuked the Pharisees, not for their beliefs, but for their duplicity. "Woe to you, for you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence." The spiritual sickness is not merely in failing to do good, but in pretending, loudly and proudly, to be good when your heart remains untouched. This duplicity is exhausting, and young people feel it deeply. Many are growing up with an intuitive sense that the rules are rigged, that the social games they're expected to play come at the cost of their soul. They are praised for saying the right thing, not for doing the hard thing. And so the hunger for authenticity grows. The desire for moral courage begins to stir. But where do we go from here? If hypocrisy is the mask, what does it take to remove it? The answer begins not with moral posturing or public confessions, but with inner confrontation. To live without hypocrisy is not to be perfect, but to be honest. To admit the gap between your ideals and your actions, and to take responsibility for closing it. Because without that inner reckoning, the masks only multiply. And behind each mask is not freedom, but fear. Part 3. The courage to be real. Authenticity as rebellion. If hypocrisy is the epidemic, then authenticity is the cure, but not the easy kind. Not the fashionable authenticity sold in slogans and self-help books. Real authenticity requires a kind of inner war, a rebellion not against others, but against our own cowardice. It is not a performance of uniqueness, but the radical decision to be fully, painfully human in a world that thrives on illusions. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." This simple, existential truth strikes at the heart of hypocrisy. When we pretend, we betray our own becoming. We defer the responsibility of selfhood to the approval of the crowd. We allow our existence to be dictated by what is easy, not what is true. But the self does not tolerate being ignored for long. The longer we pretend, the more fragmented we become. Jung described this as the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile, repress, or deny. The more we perform virtue outwardly, the more likely we are to suppress our darker impulses inwardly. Yet the shadow does not disappear. It festers, and eventually it erupts, often in ways we least expect. Depression, burnout, cynicism, or sudden explosions of rage. This is why the hypocrite is often secretly tormented. They live at war with themselves. To live truthfully is to begin making peace with that inner conflict, not by conquering it, but by facing it. Kierkegaard called this becoming a self before God, the inward journey toward authenticity that requires solitude, silence, and the stripping away of illusion. It's a painful path, but it is the only one that leads to freedom. We must ask, what would it look like to live without the mask? To speak when the truth costs you something? To act from conscience, not convenience? It would mean risking misunderstanding, risking rejection, perhaps even risking success in the eyes of the world. But what you gain is priceless. Coherence, integrity, the quiet dignity of knowing that your life aligns with your inner truth. And in that alignment, something powerful happens. You begin to see others more clearly. You stop needing to catch them in contradiction because you've already made peace with your own. You stop demanding perfection because you've abandoned the illusion of your own. In a society obsessed with judgment, authenticity creates compassion. Albert Camus wrote, "Integrity has no need of rules." What he meant was this: a life lived in truth does not need to be managed by external applause. It is governed from within. This is the rarest kind of strength, but authenticity cannot be imposed. It must be chosen again and again, not just in grand gestures, but in small daily acts. Refusing to gossip, owning a mistake, saying no when you mean no, telling the truth when it trembles in your throat. This choice is especially urgent now, because the age we live in is saturated with surface. Images without substance, speeches without soul, virtue without virtue. In such a world, the simple act of living truthfully becomes revolutionary. And perhaps this is the paradox of hypocrisy. It flourishes where authenticity is rare, yet it only takes one real, honest voice to disrupt the entire performance. One person refusing to play the game reminds everyone that a different life is possible. So what kind of person do you want to be in this age of appearances? Someone who plays their part with skill, or someone who dares to walk off stage? Part 4. Walking off the stage, a call to inner revolution. To confront hypocrisy is not to point fingers outward, but to return inward, to the place where our values were first born, before the world taught us how to disguise them. It is a lonely path at first. To unmask oneself in a world full of actors is terrifying, but it is also liberating. In shedding the costume, you begin to recover your own voice, the one that was silenced by fear, diluted by conformity, and drowned beneath applause. This, in truth, is the work of philosophy, not to solve the world's problems from afar, but to guide us back to a life examined. As Socrates famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. In the 21st century, perhaps the unexamined life is also the most performative, the life spent curating an identity rather than embodying a soul. And so we are left with a choice, not once, but daily. Will we be honest even when it costs us? Will we speak with sincerity even when it threatens our image? Will we dare to be real in a world that feeds on illusion? The danger of hypocrisy is not simply moral, it is existential. It causes a slow erosion of the self, a loss of center, a life that looks meaningful on the outside but feels hollow within. This is not just a personal burden, it is a collective danger. When enough people trade truth for performance, society loses its compass. Institutions become corrupt, language becomes suspect, and genuine moral progress becomes impossible. But you are not powerless in the face of this. In fact, the greatest resistance you can offer is a life of radical integrity, a life where your words are rooted in reflection, where your actions are guided by conscience, not convenience, where your relationships are built on honesty, not image. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." This is not a command to indulge the ego, but to confront the contradictions within you, to reconcile the mask with the face, the surface with the depth, to walk the difficult road toward inner coherence. And coherence is rare. That's why it's magnetic. People are drawn to those who live without pretension because it reminds them, painfully, beautifully, that they too could live that way. Not perfectly, not without failure, but with sincerity, with presence, with soul. So if you've ever felt exhausted by the pressure to perform, if you've ever questioned whether anyone is truly being themselves, if you've sensed the silent weight of living behind a mask, know this: You are not alone, and you don't have to stay silent. This channel, this space, is for those who are ready to look deeper, to question the illusions, to unlearn the script, to begin, perhaps for the first time, living from the inside out. If this resonates with you, if something in you is tired of pretending, then join us. Subscribe. Share this message. Let this be more than a video. Let it be the start of a quiet revolution, one where truth becomes more valuable than applause. Not everyone will understand, but those who do, they'll recognize you. Because behind every honest life is a voice that once whispered, "Enough." And that whisper is where freedom begins. If this message spoke to you, don't just watch, become part of this movement. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join a community of thinkers who don't settle for the ordinary. More content like this is coming, sharper, deeper, more uncomfortable. Don't miss it.